hello and good afternoon. I'm happy that so many people join us today for an artist talk with Emma Talbot. Also, a lot of my colleagues are here, which I'm happy also to see. We have been working for some time to show your works here, and maybe my name, I introduce myself, is Barbara Horvath. I had the pleasure to be the curator of the show, and I invited Emma, I don't know, a year ago maybe something like that. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the show is called Talking to Nature. You will also find here at the side, thank you, and a folder which is a concertina. And it is an extremely nice printing technique, which is quite new. It has this 7-color printing technique, so feel free to take one. It is in German and in English, and has a text in the back. And yeah, let me start with a short biography of you. You're being born in, you have to help me, Stourbridge, am I right?
Yes,
which
in the Midlands, but I was only there as a baby, and then as a baby I moved to London, so it's a mystery place.
It's a mystery, okay.
I remember it.
And you were raised in Kent, or in southeast of England, and you also you attended the Royal College of Arts, and you were winning the 8th edition of the Max Mara Prize for Women in 2020.
Yeah.
And this, you have been quite busy, I have to say. And I saw your work at the Venice Biennale 2 years ago, which was created by Cecilia Alemani, The Milk of Dreams. It was a beautiful silk hanging painting on silk and a sculpture.
A platform with sculptures on.
Yes, I recall. And and you were completing a residency organized by the Collezione Maramotti in Reggio Emilia. And I think then you fall in love with Italy, or was it before? I don't know.
No, and then I stayed there, yeah.
You stayed there. And since then you actually have a studio there as well. Or?
Yeah.
So you are now going back and forth from London to Italy.
Yeah.
So just recently you have been a show at the Kindle Museum in Berlin, which is is it an old brewery? I'm not sure. It is very, very high building.
The space is like 20 meters tall. It's 20 meters by 20 meters by 20 meters. So it's a big project space. And the show every project lasts for about 9 months. So it's quite big.
Oh, wow. Absolutely, yeah. And KunstHausWien in Germany was something that also was
at the end of last year.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it actually carried on to the beginning of this year. Yeah.
So just to name a couple of stations, and we will also talk a little bit about the future at the end of the show, because you will have a commissioned work going on. So you were working across drawing, sculpture, painting, and filmic animation. In general, Emma Talbot's work is about the personal human experience, what it is like to be a human being at this point of time, and how also we all have an inner narrative, which is of course our personal thoughts and feelings that drive our way of understanding the world and how we move through the world. And saying about, when we now say move a lot in the world, maybe we continue already to the work behind us, which is called Ghost Calls, as you can also see in this first textile panel. And it's a painting that is nearly 14 meter long, although it is the painted fabric it's 10 sections that are combined with little magnets. So then it is almost 14 meters. And I think you have shown it first at Dundee Contemporary in Ireland.
Scotland.
Oh, in Scotland, sorry. But you showed it quite differently there.
Because it depends, it happens a lot with my work that the work responds to the site where it's shown. So the space in Dundee, DCA, is a very different kind of space, much higher, a big kind of 19th century white cube space. And so this panel was straight, but at a diagonal, and it cut the space in half, and you walked around it. And for me, it's kind of important that you see both sides, that you don't just view it as a kind of flat, kind of a wall-based thing, that you're actually moving around it.
Which we will also do.
Yeah. And then it was at Aros in Denmark. Yeah.
Right. So we are the third station, basically.
Yeah.
And it's done the work is from 2021. And again, it's a painting on silk. And there is this creature, this figure depicted all over the panels, which has long hair. You also see this lettering. But maybe I'm not telling too much. Maybe or I'm more interested to hear it in your words. Can you reflect on how you came to paint Ghost Calls and your starting point or your research, and why this group of women are so sad?
Yeah. So the thinking about the work was the work was made in this kind of strange period of time where it was during the pandemic, we were in and out of lockdowns. So in that sense, a kind of collapse of our systems was really evident. You know, we couldn't do the things we normally did, and it forced us to really think about how we lived, what we did, what we used, how we set up these human systems which are kind of put humans at the center, and then as if everything exists around them for them. And what I noticed was our increasing involvement with the natural world during the pandemic. I think sort of generally in the West, people started to do things which they hadn't maybe had time to do before, you know, growing plants or kind of tending to nature, or thinking about these kinds of interactions in ways that were quite different. You know, this sense of going outside being something that was taken away from us and then we valued. And it made me think, in my work, I'm always making work which responds to the ideas that are the most kind of pressing to me at the time. The things that I'm most concerned about are always the starting points. And I was invited to make the show in Dundee, and Dundee is a town which is surrounded by mountains. You know, it's in Scotland, and there you can see this kind of mountainous space around it. And I wanted to make a landscape as a container. And at the same time, because of this idea of systems crashing, I was imagining, it was like a sort of thought experiment. I was imagining, when systems crash, if you can't live the way you lived before, if something drastic happens in your life, you really have to reconfigure. And that reconfiguring is quite often accompanied by a sort of grieving, where you grieve the life you had because you realize what you had in a different way. And then in reformulating, and I'm saying this also because, you know, in my background, I'm a widow, so I've had an experience of my life completely transforming, and grieving being a process that's kind of interesting, because although it's awful and sad, it has attached to it kind of some types of freedom, because you have to reimagine. And that might sound strange and contradictory, but I was really interested in, if systems crash, we have to go from a place that we know really well, a set of systems we know well, into a future that we don't know, and that's scary. But if we had a group of people helping us to grieve, to process, go through this time, then we would be able to think about a viable future in quite a positive way. And this becomes a set of issues which become much, much bigger, that are about threats of climate crisis, or the kind of problematics around systems of capitalism. Those kinds of bigger things that affect all of us are also co-involved in this thinking, because everything in my mind goes from something very personally felt into something we all share and something more global. So I was doing research in Scotland, and I found out about this tradition, a Celtic tradition, which was in Ireland and Scotland, of keeners, and they were professional mourners who would go to the place where someone died, their home, and they would go out into the landscape and they would wail and lament, and they would tell the story of this person's life, and their role was to help the dead person go from this realm to the next, but also help the family to begin to grieve. So their terrible wailing would allow people to access this kind of feeling, which is probably, it's terrible and difficult. And so I thought, if there were this group of women who were keeners, and they would lead us from a kind of modern human set of structures, into a kind of viable future which is not entirely delineated because we don't know everything that it contains, but will be a journey together, help us kind of move forwards to survive. And also because of the sorts of threats that we have at the moment in the world, we really do have to think about how we survive, what our ongoingness will be, and it's a very sort of contemporary concern.
In an interview, I have learned that one of the earliest three-dimensional figures, and we will also see one, you've made was a ghost.
Yes.
And here we are in front of a painting called Ghost Calls.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, are ghosts haunting you, or rather, which ghosts are haunting you?
In this piece of work, you see the panel at the top. There are these heads that float through the space. They sort of look like they're going in all directions. And the idea is that at the bottom, there's a kind of landscape that humans are discovering or exploring, and they find all these traces of human culture that are left behind in that space, and the space being like a container. And above them, there's an idea of these kinds of energies, which I think is what I mean by ghosts, these kinds of spirits or energies that are ever present, that have seen they've witnessed everything. In this case, the ghosts are a sort of reminder that things, our history is quite long, and the ghosts are there to sort of remind us that humans have had to adapt and change, and that there are past cultures we could maybe learn from, but they have this kind of presence, which is to say, whatever we think, say, reality is a kind of construct right now, and what else there is might be more imperceptible, or we might not be tuned into, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. So it's like this kind of play with temporality. Our lives are really short, and we exist in a much sort of longer, older temporal space. So, and then the three-dimensional work that I made was a figure that was about this tall.
That's Emma's voice, or
that's me keening, with long hair like mine, and it was actually a kind of head that was on a papier-mâché form, and it stood in a one-person show that I had. And at the time, I was thinking about three-dimensional works as things that have to be present. So it could have been a drawing, but I wanted it to have a physical presence. And I wanted it to be a kind of figure that is there and present, but isn't really there, because it's a sculpture. So, but it's not a sculpture like a sort of traditional sculpture, in the sense that it's like a, like you might see a kind of statue. It's not like that. It's like a kind of sort of odd that the artist, because it's like a version of me, that the artist haunts the space that they're in, that they're having a show and that you can't meet them or see them usually, but they sort of haunt this space for a bit, and you see the sort of evidence of them, but you don't encounter them. So I was kind of just thinking about all those ideas about presence and about, what holds space.
Yes, that is lovely. And speaking about the three-dimensional work, maybe we move across the corner to see one of your 3D works. So this three-dimensional work is titled Talking to Nature, and it embodies the dialogue humans enter into with the natural world. A female figure covered in a satiny surface sits opposite a snake and offers a string of glass beads in green and red. And in many cultures, the snake is a symbol for wisdom and transformation, rebirth. And this imaginary scene attempts to materialize an intangible idea, which is it possible to converse with nature? Do you think nature is communicating with us? Or how is nature communicating with us?
I think the first thing to say is that we are a part of nature. We're not separate from nature. It's not as if it's a very kind of human construct to imagine ourselves as we're separate and the rest is nature. We're actually a part of nature. We can't live without nature. We can't survive without this these relationships. And so this idea of talking to nature is about what you could learn if you opened a kind of discursive space. But I did wonder when I was thinking about it whether it could have been listening to nature, because it's not to say that, it's more about a kind of receptive kind of position. And I was doing a lot of research into transformative processes where, you take hallucinogenics and you're able to have these experiences of kind of seeing other dimensions or understanding other dimensions. And I was doing this research because I was doing a lot of work. I was doing some research staying on a permaculture site, and I was doing a lot of research into ways of approaching our relationships with nature. And one of the encounters that people most frequently talked about when they were taking these hallucinogenic drugs was that they saw a snake, and it's a massive snake, and it's really, really common that people see this. And I find it really interesting that it's something in human consciousness that is repeated. It's as if we can tune into something else. So I was thinking, this sort of that experience where you move outside of the sort of pedestrian or the everyday, and you move into another spatial awareness, let's say, or consciousness, could be, what we need to do now in order to really build connections with nature is kind of think a bit differently, about how we go about doing things. And so I was just really interested in this potential for us to sort of begin to learn in different ways from, nature is such a sort of generic term, but
sure.
From the natural world or any of those spaces. But also in this, the figure is holding a string of glass beads, and visually they sort of have a relationship with the snake skin, this red snake skin. So there's a kind of visual relationship, but it's as if the human is trying to order or make a code or make a sort of plan of something, which it is its way of organizing the world, its understanding of the world. And, there's this sort of tendency in humans to try to, pin everything down by calculating and, codifying. There's these sort of different ways of operating.
I mean, how does your work maybe challenge conventional views of nature? Because we were talking now about us as humans seeing ourselves separated from nature. Yeah. So what does it suggest about the interconnectedness of humans and the environment from an ecological or spiritual perspective?
But I think when we talk about a kind of conventional way of thinking, I think the things that I'm talking about are becoming conventional. It's not as if they're so sort of abstract and strange. We know about them. We know about, Lovelock writing about Gaia. We know about Bruno de la Torre. We know about Donna Haraway. We know about Isabel Stengers. We know about the kind of context in which people are talking, and also, you know, there are events like there are here with the, you know, climate change. What's the title of it? The conference that you have every year, which is
the future talks.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, and it's like it's not something that I don't mean conventional in a sort of limited, boring sense. I mean that it's part of our set of discourses at this period in time, because we have to rethink a project which was, in my mind, a kind of modernist project that really made the sort of root of the 20th century also had effects that were quite damaging. And we're now facing those effects, and we have to think about, you know, that modernist project, it doesn't actually work so well. So we're now in a period of time where we're sort of
also maybe a transition period of time. I think.
Yeah, and that's a good place to be, in the sense of, you know, imagining what it could be, and that's probably why storytelling, different approaches to kind of conveying information are becoming much more not conventional, but they don't seem so sort of outlandish, or they don't seem so fiction and fact seem to be kind of weaving together. There are openings in terms of how we can communicate that are, you know, they sort of are connected to the times we live in.
And or the communication, which is now, or let's put it the other way, you know that I like to spot a lot here in the room, because as you can see, we can see the lights coming in from the back, and at the figures, the three-dimensional work also have this connectedness and this relatedness with the silk painting. I do remember you telling, I think yesterday, days are very long right now, how you maybe also you would like to know how the process of painting on silk would how you do that. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, because it's not such an easy process. And I think you taught yourself that, no?
Yeah, because I, you know, thinking before I said about this kind of idea of the modernist project, that there's sort of set of givens about how things would or should be done. It's the same in painting, you know, that there's a beginning point for painting, which is a white rectangle, which is a prepared canvas. And I had been making drawings on handmade paper, and the handmade paper had bits of bark in it, bits of leaf in it, and it was irregular. And I wanted to make works that were much bigger, but that had this sort of feel of, you know, that the space of the image wasn't so sort of rigid and regular. So I was thinking, well, what could I paint on that could be equivalent? And then I remembered that, you know, silk is a surface that has been painted on for thousands of years, and it's, you know, obviously a viable surface for painting. But I thought I should use fabric paint, because I thought it just was logical. But in fact, it didn't work. So because the fabric paint kind of clogs up the silk and makes it more rigid. So I ended up, after a lot of experimentation, using a type of paint which is a kind of acrylic that's fluid, that has a really high pigment level. So you can water it down and you still retain the pigment. And so on silk, the silk has to be really taut to be able to paint on it, because if you imagine touching it and it's just moving away from you, you can't paint on it. But also you have to be able to control the volume of the paint quite precisely to make a line, because if it's too fluid, it will just dissipate just like that, spreads on the surface. And then that means that the painting that I make is probably closer to if you were making watercolors, probably. But the paint becomes sort of voluminous enough that I can also write with it, you know, paint these words. And so in the studio, I have loads of frames that I've had made for stretching the silk. And then the silk is taken off the frames, and then it's cut up and sewn together into sections, depending on the space or the work or the format.
Because I can imagine painting on silk, as far as I know it, and especially when you do figurative forms and lettering, that there are no mistakes. You cannot make any mistakes, because otherwise it's going to be ruined. Or I mean, you cannot erase it somehow.
That's it. It's not. It's not. But I mean, because I guess in making artwork, sometimes mistakes are really helpful, and you learn something that you didn't anticipate. But yes, you're right. Every mark you make, you can't take away. You know, you make a mark and it stays there, and then everything you do is, well, it's very close to drawing. You know, that you draw on a piece of paper and all the marks you've made are there. And in that sense, for me, it's like a freedom. It kind of, I feel like it's freeing to have that. And then there are also all these washes that go over the top that then change it. They kind of condition it a bit more. So even at the beginning, maybe, of making a painting, a panel of painting, there's a sort of drawn space and it can look quite static. And then once I start putting washes over it, then it's as if it sort of has a bit of a life to it. That it's like I know I'm going to do that. But it's a very particular way of painting, you know.
That's true. And also, since we are a green museum, I was it fascinated me that the work arrived in a little package. And then when you really lay it out and you hang it, it is room filling. So this is also something that you're interested in on an ecological point of view, that instead of transporting a lot of square meters, we have a small roll, and depending on the space we're in, you think about the hanging. So this is something which is also a feature that you like about silk, or
that it can be, you know, I was talking about this museum in Berlin before, and the paintings were 10 meters by 14 meters, you know, they're massive, and they were made in sort of strips of silk that were then joined together. But the packet, when they were transported, the packets were like this for each painting. And that's really important to me, because I think there's something about, you know, the footprint of that moving around. It became important to me that if the subject of the work touches on ideas of, you know, rethinking and how you sort of manage your own responsibility, let's say, I have to extend that into what I do in the studio. And I use a lot of recycled materials, and not everything is perfect. Like, you can't do it completely always 100%. But when I stayed on the permaculture site, I remember the person who lived there, who'd built their own house, saying to me, you can't do everything 100%, but you do it as much as you can. And I thought, this is, you know, this is, for me, kind of ethically, I think it's a good thing to do, is for me to do as much as I can towards that, and know that sometimes it can't be utterly perfect, but it's you know, I feel good about making sure that those things are considered. That's
absolutely, I believe you understand your work as, let's say, a vehicle that raise questions about your times, our times, about what matters in our times. But let's put it other way. I do see a lot of hopefulness in your work. Would you say that is something that interests you to not only, you know, because we were talking about grieving the life that you had before, which leads you to maybe a future way of living that you don't know yet, which is also scary, and maybe but it can also be hopeful. Or is it more a dystopic way of
it's really not dystopic, because just personally, I don't think I would be really happy going to the studio if what I did was always really dystopic and depressing. I think I have to have a feeling of a kind of excited energy about what I'm making, and a feeling of potential. You know, there's a sort of potential in the work, and or potential in the ideas, or a sort of excitement about the making that, you know, hopefully is somewhere in the work. You know, that the feeling of hopefulness is maybe equivalent to a sort of drive that you have to do what you do, that you have an idea and you want to see it, or you want to construct a set of ideas in a way that is really particular. And in finding a way to do that, maybe hopefulness is all caught up in that, because even when I'm dealing with grief, which is a real thing that people are feeling every day, someone's grieving, it's a part of life, it's awful, but with it comes a sort of acceptance. You learn something, in my experience, you learn something about acceptance, and also that acceptance allows you to think everything doesn't have to be, like I said, perfect, but it's all right. And there are things like that that are in the work that are about this sort of spaces of, I don't know how to put it, but a space that things can be all right, even if you're talking about the most terrible things. There's always there has to be a sense of hope.
That sounds like hope to me.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Maybe my last question before I open to the audience here is, I would love you to speak about your new project. I think it was in July this year that you joined a worldwide fund, WWF, UK research trip to the Isle of Skye and Oban in Scotland.
Western Scottish Islands.
And you did learn about the seaweed farming industry.
Yes.
And it's important to future, and seaweed is important to future health, ocean health.
Yes.
And the climate mitigation.
Yes.
What did you see and experience?
I was with a group of people. There were 2 artists, and the rest of the people were researchers, or people who were interested in funding projects which are to do with ocean health. And so the seaweed, we went out on boats to see seaweed farms, and we also went to a research centre which also has a seaweed farm. And seaweed is a really incredible, it's incredible in the sense that it captures carbon, and because it captures carbon, it can help clean and maintain ocean life. And so it has a sort of a sense of it allows something to happen that rebalances carbon production, and at the same time it's a very viable material for making or replacing materials we already use. So its application can be in sort of health products like creams, or it can be in food, it can be in supplements. But it also can be a flooring, it can be used to make transport containers, it can be used in lots of different applications, and they've also made an ink, so it can be used in printing. And so we went to see we saw the seaweed farm, we met the seaweed farmers, we went to a place that processes the seaweed, which is, how we saw how it was harvested, how it was processed, and then we went to a place which was a set of labs where they were developing these different applications. And the ink is, at the moment, it's not light fast, but it can be used for packaging that then, once the packaging is disposed of to be recycled, it doesn't have the branding on it, so it makes sense sustainably. But I'm doing a project using the ink to make artwork, and my part in the project is making some work that has a kind of visibility within this project that also uses some of the materiality, but also is involved with kind of the message of these processes and how.
So eventually there will be drawings, or?
There are drawings already, and then dependent on funding, there'll be maybe an animation as well. But it's with World Wildlife Fund, so it's a project that it's the sort of thing that I'm really interested in. But at the same time, I'm making other kinds of projects, which are, you know, for museum shows or other things. So it's a slow burn project at the moment. Yeah.
All right. We have not spoken yet about Keening Songs, which is the film animation, which is around the corner. It's about 20 minutes. It is in relation to also ghost calls. So I invite you to maybe take a bit of time and watch it. And would like to...
Could I say something
sure,
that
would you like to?
we haven't said, apart from thanking Barbara for the opportunity to be here and the museum? I just want to say something about the relationship between the Hundertwasser space and the work, because when Barbara contacted me and she said, I don't know if you know about Hundertwasser, and I remember looking at Hundertwasser when I was a student. And my tutors, perhaps I shouldn't say, they're saying, don't look at that. Because they thought at the time, I mean, it was a long time ago, but they thought it was just really sort of decorative work. And decorative work was really out of fashion at the time. They were like, don't look at Klimt, don't look at Hundertwasser, don't look. Because, anyway, it was to do with a period of time. And sort of in the back of my mind, I was always like, yeah, but I just like looking at it. So it was something that I didn't know much about him, and I didn't know much about his ethos or the sort of, you know, history of him. But when I saw this space and I thought about my work in relation to the works that are in this space, I was really excited about drawing these sort of connections between the work that exists here and some of the work that I already had, that I really wanted to be able to put these things together. And what I tried to do in this space is make it so that you have to be quite up close to the walls, so that you have to sort of make a sense of this work in relation to this space, that you understand it as not one encompassing the other, but them in conversation, if you like. So Talking to Nature is the title of that piece of work, but it's also a bit like talking between, you know, these artworks are talking in general about a set of subjects, but across sort of generations or different periods.
Thanks so much, Emma.
Thank you.
It has been a pleasure talking with you and having you here for the last couple of days.
It's been a pleasure for me.
To say thank you for coming and showing so much interest in the work of Emma Talbot, which I'm sure you will encounter in many ways next year, because you have lots of exhibitions coming up in all over Europe.
In Copenhagen, Utrecht, Athens, and the UK.
So yeah, thanks for coming, and thank you.
Thank you.